السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. First, I want to start off by thanking the organizers for having me here at the MSA West Conference. It's an honor to be here as an MSA West alumni, as in someone who grew up with this organization when I was in college. It's always good to see MSA West doing its thing. It's maybe you guys don't realize how important, how powerful your role is, but you really give morale to the older generation, to all the other Islamic institutions that exist. The work that the students have been doing and do is always a morale boost and a reminder. And a lot of times the students have the courage to do what maybe some of the older institutions don't. So I want to say again that it's an honor to be here and to be with all of you. I wanted to talk very quickly about this subject because I think it's something that can turn into a really beneficial discussion, inshallah. I often say that Muslims a lot of times are Islamophobic, that Muslims themselves have a fear of the Sharia, that they're afraid of the Islamic legal system, they're afraid of Islam. And from the category of Muslims that tend to be very Islamophobic, I would say Muslim women tend to be very Islamophobic. And the reason for that is because even within our own community, there's a lot of misinformation about the role of women in Islam. Within our own community, we hear things out of context. There's a lot of spiritual abuse against women. Verses of the Quran are misused, ahadith of the Prophet are misused, narrations from the Prophet. A lot of different concepts are not clearly understood. A lot of times something that's cultural is imposed on us in the name of Islam. And as a result, sisters tend to be afraid to understand Islam. And I want us to think about a statement of Ustad Zainab al-Ghazali. Zainab al-Ghazali was a great figure that that passed away in the early 2000s, a figure in Egyptian history, and a great Islamic worker, a great activist. I kind of call her the Egyptian version of Malcolm X, but female. If anyone's interested in her biography, check out her autobiography. It's called Return of the Pharaoh. It's something I read when I was younger, had a profound impact on me. And she says in her book, Muslim women need to study Islam because it is through Islam that Allah has guaranteed her all her rights. Now, this is a statement that made many people accuse her possibly of being a feminist, right? A feminist in the Western context or in the liberal context. But subhanAllah, she never associated herself with Western liberal feminism because that wasn't the inspirational point for her for her to be a great woman in her time. That wasn't where she took her source of inspiration from. It wasn't she didn't study feminism. What she did is she studied Islam and she discovered the power and the honor and the dignity that Islam gives women. And she didn't back down from it. And the thing that's amazing, subhanAllah, in terms of my own story of going to study abroad in Egypt, is that when you study something for yourself, when you read something for yourself, when you understand the way the Sharia works for yourself, no one can take a right away from you once you know that it's your God-given right. Once you are certain this is my God-given right, no one can intimidate you. Doesn't matter if they're a sheikh, doesn't matter if they're a scholar, because you have that scholarship. And so you know what they're talking about, and you know what Islam truly says. So as a woman who, took that course and went to Egypt and studied, I want to say that I'm much more reassured in my faith than before. Before I felt insecure because I was always afraid of doing the wrong thing. Am I stepping outside of what the bounds that I'm supposed to be in? When you understand Islam, it's a lot easier than you may think. And not just easier, but it's very empowering. And again, I say that it's empowering not only on a social level in terms of rights and whatnot, but especially on a spiritual level. So to be this Miss Interdependent, and actually the organizers wanted to use the word independent, and I told them I'm not comfortable with that term because of the connotations of the word dependent, independent, and the better term, which is interdependent. That I don't believe that I myself am independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm also not independent of His creation. That the system of Islam makes us as human beings social animals. We are interdependent. We give and we take from one another. So thinking about this in terms of what the session says, the 5 themes: woman, worshiper, organized, monetarily responsible, active, and nurturing. Worshipper, I want to start with, is the most important one. But to really understand what this one means and how it affects all the others, you have to understand the concept of what it means to truly be sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is sincerity? When we hear the term in English, we may not understand how much depth there is to this concept. Some of the scholars mentioned that ikhlas is 1/3 of the religion. 1/3 of the religion. So it's something that, just because we studied it once or heard it once in a lecture, it's not something you leave alone. It's something you have to keep revisiting as a human being and as a woman. If you look at all of the great women in Islamic history, you find women who were devout worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had a very strong relationship with Him. And this is where they took their source of liberation from. This is where they took their strength from. When we think about success, what is success? What does it mean to be successful? Think about it to yourself for a second. If you could have all of your goals accomplished, whether that's who you want to get married to, or a career, or if you want to be a hafiza or a scholar, if you want to be a mother, if you want to be this top-level activist or volunteer in the community, if your goal for success is to be beautiful, to be physically fit, to make lots of money, think about what it is that would make you feel successful in this life. Something that, when you're around other people, you feel successful. If someone asked for you to share your biography in some way, you would feel this is something that I can be proud of. Now, the things that I just mentioned, they're all means. None of them are actually goals. So they're empty in and of themselves. Even the Islamic goals are empty in and of themselves. Anything that's done for its own sake can become its own cage and its own idol that is falsely worshipped. So what do I mean by this? It means that when your definition of success is not intimately tied with success in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, then it's a shallow definition, and it's a form of being more, I would say, attached to worldly definitions of success in dunya, worldly desires. Now, it doesn't mean that if someone whose goals are attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, someone can have a goal of marriage and a career and motherhood and activism and all of these things, but when it's attached to Allah and His pleasure, it becomes an act of worship. So something that is normally seen as a social cage of conformity becomes something completely different. And when you're working for the success, that is the definition being tied intimately to your relationship with Allah. My happiness and my success comes from Allah's pleasure with me. What I plan to do, my goals are based on how I want Allah to be pleased with me. When that happens, then these things, whether you succeed or fail or whatnot, they become part of your journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it becomes a beautiful journey. It's not a cage. It's not stressful. I mean, there are stresses, but it's not this stressful sort of cage that you're in. And if you look at American women, or in general, if you look in the media, what are they saying that a successful woman is? She's a great career woman. She's very, in shape, usually a little bit anorexic, very fashionable. She has 6 kids, or not 6 kids, usually 3 kids, but it doesn't look like she's even had one. Because, as soon as she delivers the baby, all the baby fat is gone. Makeup, whatnot. She has the perfect marriage, perfect, home in suburbia. And women will compete with one another to fulfill this definition of success. And they won't just compete with each other, they'll compete with themselves. They'll beat themselves up. They'll hate themselves if they're not able to meet these definitions. And so this thing that they think is going to bring them happiness actually brings them unhappiness, brings them depression. When they can't meet these things. She has to always be happy and jolly and make jokes. I mean, if you look in the media, a lot of times the female actors and actresses are the ones who have to be the most comedic. They are the entertainment value or the comic relief of a group. So you look at these things, and you start to see that within our own community, within the Muslims themselves, we fall into these traps. psychologically we fall into these traps. We start to associate success according to these measures. And sometimes it's not your fault as young people. I know many people who are very comfortable with journeying towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being comfortable with their journey at their own pace, but sometimes their parents make them think that they're worthless if they're not married. Or their parents might make them feel that you're worthless if you don't have a PhD. And it's your job as individuals, it's our job as individuals to return the definition of success back to its rightful owner, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to take our own happiness back from those who have, or those elements, I want to say, those worldly elements that are trying to strip us away from that. And there's a documentary, I don't know if you guys have Netflix. How many of you have Netflix? Okay, good. You guys can watch this afterwards. Please watch this documentary. It's called Happy, and it goes into what makes people happy. And what's interesting about the definition that they give is one of the core things is to be attached to something transcendent, like nature or a spiritual path. This is something that's been proven to bring happiness. Money, on the other hand, is not proven to increase happiness. So subhanAllah, we know these things, but to really live it, we're going to do an activity. To really try to assess ourselves on this level, I'm going to ask that you don't resist Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when you think about your own happiness, knowing that He is the source of it, knowing that there is no happiness without Him. You can have pleasures without Him. There are temporary moments of pleasure you can experience, but you cannot experience happiness without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so don't resist Him, and don't be afraid of Him, and don't be afraid of Islam. The small things or the big things, right? Someone can say, for the sake of Allah, I want to do this huge thing, but on a daily level, they're not allowing themselves to taste the sweetness and the happiness of submitting to Him in prayer, or of submitting to Him in being kind to their parents, of submitting to Him in the daily things, to taste that happiness. And when you do something for Allah versus when you do something for the people, the experience is completely different. Even to be nice to your own mother, not because you love her, but because you know Allah would love you for being more kind to her, the experience of that is completely different. Your own spouse, well, not married, many of you are not married, your brothers and sisters, the experience is entirely different. So what I'm going to ask for all of us right now is to imagine, if you want to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. If you don't want to, it's fine. But really take a moment to imagine this moment, because this is a moment that will come. It's not folklore. It's not something that, some tales that we hear about and forget about. This is reality. This is the truth that will come to each and every one of us. So imagine that it is the Day of Judgment. It's Yawm al-Qiyamah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling your name, or you hear your name being called, and you know that you are going to come before Him. And as you're passing through the crowds to stand before Him, you see people that you want to be with. You see some people in the crowd that you're like, man, that's the crowd I want to be with. You see Maryam, alayhi salam. You see Aisha. You see Khadija. You see Asiya. You see Zainab al-Ghazali. You see great women in Islamic history. And you think, that's the crowd of women I want to belong to in paradise. You also see male companions. You see the prophets. You see the shuhada, the martyrs. You see all of these people, and as you're passing by, you realize that now you are going to have to answer by yourself, without your parents, without your family, without anyone else. You are standing in front of Allah by yourself. And your book of deeds is being brought forth. And it's your time to tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what you did for Him. What is it that you dedicated for His love, for His pleasure? What is success on that day? And what I want us to do as we think about this moment is to go back through each of the different things that we normally would associate with happiness and success in this life, and think about how would we present these things to Allah. Whatever they are, whether it's trying to be healthy, whether it's trying to do well in school, how do I want to present these things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? On that day, we're going to want to say to him, when no one else can help us, Ya Allah, this is what I did for you. So what is that special thing? Aside from the normal things or the regular things, each one of us can make the intention right now to do something amazing and unique in our lives for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one else can do it but you. I can't do the thing that you intend, right? I can only do for Allah the thing that I intend for Allah. So think about, on that day, companions, the great women, they're going to have some great things to show. What are you going to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And it is from that relationship and what you dedicate in that moment that is going to be the source of your interdependence in this life, inshallah, and the source of your success and happiness even in this life and the next. So I say this, and whatever is beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is wrong and mistaken is from myself and the shaitan. I'm going to pass the mic to Maryam so she can continue. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, with the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, may the peace and blessings of God be upon the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Moses, and Jesus, and Abraham, and every single messenger that he has sent, and all the righteous people, Maryam, alayhi salam, Asya, and all of you, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I'm going to tell you about my personal journey, inshallah, to the point where I started feeling like Islam was what is my source of liberation and empowerment. And the reason I want to share it with you is because I think a lot of you might be dealing with similar issues or might have gone through them. So hopefully, inshallah, we can talk about them, and then we can have a discussion and talk about questions, and we can have Sheikh al-Muslima answer the question, and inshallah, have a discussion about it. So I grew up in, alhamdulillah, a family where my mom, who's over there, may Allah bless her, and bless all of the mothers here. Do we have any other mothers here? Mothers? MashaAllah! May Allah bless all of our mothers. My parents found Islam in college. So when I was raised in a family that cared about Islam. But I didn't really relate. I didn't have a conscientious Muslim identity. And it wasn't until, alhamdulillah, we were blessed to go for Umrah. So I was blessed to go to Mecca. And I started reading the Quran in translation because I didn't know Arabic. It just transformed my life. So when I started getting involved with Islam, I was really excited, really, really excited. Have any of you had that experience when you first get into Islam and you're so passionate about it? You're like, yeah, Islam rocks, right? So I loved it, and as you can tell, I love to talk. So I was so excited, and I'd be like, yes, dawah, Allah's the best, right? And I was really, really passionate. Okay, so now my mom, she is a very, very strong woman. She is the one who's excuse me, we do not have a prayer place that's like the brothers. This is a problem. We are going to change the world right now because this masjid is not okay. That is her personality. So that's what I grew up with. How many masjid boards have been so angry because my mom was there? The only woman who is always the token woman, right? This is a problem. It's a big problem in our community. That's not Islam. That's a cultural problem. So anyway, that's what I grew up with. Now, as I started getting more and more into Islam, I started taking more classes, I started learning from other people, and I started learning very different things. So for example, when I came from a background of loving to be involved with student body and being involved in leadership and all of that, I started feeling wait a second, the role of a woman should actually be at home. Oh, wait a second, I shouldn't be in front of people. Wait a second, I shouldn't be doing these, outstanding things, because that's just not Islamically correct. Have any of you heard those types of notions before? Wow. And have you wondered what the truth is? Yeah, it's very confusing. Should we really be lawyers? Is that okay? Do you see what I'm saying? We have these types of questions. So then I started going through this whole transformation, and my mom was going crazy. May Allah bless her. She's like, what happened to you? Because I used to be all over the place, and now it's just I need to sit here until sunrise, and if I don't cry, something's wrong with my iman. Subhanallah, I was going through serious depression, man. And I don't think depression is the right word, but it was scary because I loved Islam so much. Then when I learned about Islam, I started transforming into this person who I wasn't. My personality was completely gone. And the reason that happened is because I thought that was what Islam was supposed to be. This is the result of taking random ayahs or random hadiths not having an understanding of them, and saying, this is what we're supposed to do. This is a problem when we don't understand our religion, and we learn from people who have a cultural understanding. There's a big difference between culture and Islam, right? Right? Watching football. American culture. Can we say that we watch football as Americans? Yes. Would we say that our religion says we have to watch football? No. Is there a problem with watching football? No. Is there a problem with watching the halftime show when Beyonce is performing? Yes. Okay, so now we can see that may Allah SWT bless Beyonce. She has done so much, that she has so much potential. May Allah bless her. May God bless her with using all of the ability she has to really transform the way we understand women's liberation in this country. And bless her with showing that in relationship to God. That would be amazing. Unfortunately, that's not really what happened. And that's the message we get, right? We get that as Muslim women, like, dress modestly, be Beyonce. Come on, it's so hard, and that's how we see people struggle. There are women who, whether or not they wear a headscarf, they try to wear some type of modest clothing, but sometimes we see people who struggle with that. So even if you're wearing a scarf, like, sometimes we have a conflicted idea. Like, how should I really dress to be attractive, but at the same time, I'm trying to follow my religion? How many of us have those issues? A lot of us struggle with these issues. So anyway, I was going through all this, and now I'm in college, and I'm like, okay, there's this class. It's called Islam, Women, and Sexuality. I'm going to take it because I know that the person who's teaching might not know anything about what Islam really says, and I have to defend my religion. Has this ever happened to any of you guys before? Okay. Because, like, you know, you're the only Muslim and you have to represent, like, 1.6 billion Muslims, so, like, listen to everything I say. So I go into the class, and as I'm sitting there, she's talking about marriage, divorce laws, child custody. I've never studied any of this stuff. At this point, I had been memorizing Quran for some time. I'd been trying to learn Arabic. I'm taking classes here and there. It's not like scholarship. Muslema is a scholar. She graduated. She graduated from okay? MSA West, 2004. Actually, it's 2003. I'm 16. It's my first MSA West. I'm a junior. This is my first year, like, oh, I love Islam. Okay? So I go to MSA West. She's on stage. And I just remember this moment. The room is packed. And she was like, the women here will be the mothers. Okay, you're the She's like, we'll be the mothers of the people who, like, change the face of the earth because they're going to be the reviver. Because, like, every 100 years there's, like, a reviver, and they will be the mothers of the reviver. And then the whole crowd's like, Takbir! And then Imam Suhaib comes up and he's like, she's engaged to Sheikh Jamal. May Allah bless them. May Allah bless her upcoming child. May Allah SWT bless their family. Now look, if we want to understand what Islam is about, we go through this route where we study seriously, okay? So, I'm in this class, I've never studied the stuff she studied, and all I'm hearing are things about how women don't have rights in divorce, we don't have rights in marriage, the guy is the one who has all these rights, if you have a child, blah, 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 and I am so confused. And not only am I really confused, I am doubting my religion. Has that ever happened to you? Yes. I am starting to doubt what Islam is about, period. Not necessarily worshiping God. I love this part. I love the connection. I love the social justice in the Quran. I love the way the Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon his life, is all about character and serving people. But women, I didn't really, like, what happened? I was so, like, into Islam because of women's rights. And now I don't get it. Everything I'm learning is so confusing. So, after this class, I started to take other classes. I started to learn. Alhamdulillah, I was very blessed to have many conversations with Imam Suhaib Webb because he was the imam in our masjid. So he was like, what's wrong with you, girl? Like, this is Islam. Like, don't listen to what people say sometimes. So now look, why I'm telling you all this background is because we have a lot that people tell us. We have the message either from our parents or from our society that you need to look a certain way to grab a guy. Okay, we want to get married. What's a girl? Who doesn't? Okay, some people don't. There are people who want to get married. She's like, I don't want to get married. And that's okay. That's fine. That's totally fine. But what I'm saying is there are people who want to have a spouse for the love and for that compassion and the connection and all that. Okay, that's great. So now look, but when we're told from either our parents or society or the masjid or whatever, that if you're 23, 25, 26, 30 and not married, you have a problem. Have you guys heard that before? That's a problem. That's not Islam. That is a cultural problem. And the problem is that it puts so much pressure on us because it's like, how am I supposed to act and behave And how am I supposed to consider myself as an individual if I'm not connected to this other person? If someone wants to get married, they already have the pressure because they want to get married. It's not like Mr. Muslim just showed up and it's like, oh, you, but I'm not ready for you right now, girl. Like, sometimes you're not ready, but if he's like the right one, most of the time the problem is you're not finding the right one, right? Yeah. So anyway, the point is, we need to understand that when we're getting these messages, either about Islam being disempowering, or Islam saying that women should be at home and shouldn't be involved, and all of those types of things, or that Islam is all about respecting your husband and being married, or that Islam doesn't allow you to be a lawyer or a doctor, all these types of things. These types of things are things we need to research. Do not allow somebody who just comes up on stage, and just because they're on stage, they suddenly have authority to let you question your religion. There were girls today who talked to me. Who were the 3 girls who talked to me? Where are you guys at? In the last session about marriage afterwards, and you were like, there's this one guy, this one name that we think, I'm not going to say what the name is. Where are you? Right there. Okay. Oh, I didn't mean to point you out, but I just did. I do that so much. I'm so sorry. Okay, now, they were talking about when people come up stage and they're like, they make these points about how Islam says this for women or this for women, right? The problem is, when you're like, I disagree with that, and then they bring up an ayah in the Quran, you don't know how to respond, right? What? What?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Oh, okay. Takbir! Give me a mashallah or something. Just kidding. Okay. So now look, if I don't know how to respond to when somebody is saying something about my religion, how is that going to make me feel? And look, the bigger problem is that this person who's on stage, who's like, blah, 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 women, blah, 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 you shouldn't go to the masjid at all because it's not good for you, it's better for you to pray in your home, right? He says all that. And then you're like, but I like to pray in the masjid because I feel closer to God. And then he's like, well, did you know that this hadith? And then you're like, I have nothing to say because I haven't studied anything. Ouch. So the point here is that for us to be empowered, we need to study, okay? Every single one of us needs to make an intention and an internal effort, a serious effort, that if I want to understand the empowerment that God blessed me with, that He took people who used to bury their baby girls alive and made them part of the social and political system, so much so that they were the ones who the Prophet, peace be upon him, consulted in making major decisions. If those things happen because of a religion from God Almighty, then I'm the one who needs to understand that if I'm hearing something that's kind of throwing me off, I need to research it so that I can understand myself. Does that make sense? Okay, alhamdulillah. The other thing is that a lot of times we hear something and we're like, that kind of like irks me, right? It doesn't rub the right way. But sometimes that could just be me having a problem. So for example, I don't like something, whatever that thing is. I can't think of an example, but the point is, I'm not comfortable with it. And then I hear a hadith and I'm like, come on, the Prophet ﷺ couldn't have said that. Do you see what I'm saying when you hear that? So in that point, it's like, is there something wrong with me? Am I the one who's seeing this in a different light, maybe because of my background, maybe because of my understanding, whatever? Or is there really something wrong there? So the point is, I just need to do my research. I don't need to be critical of every single thing I hear, but I need to have an open mind, and I need to be critical about what I hear in general, and I need to do my own research to do that. So, now, we are often told that we should be super, super, super beautiful, but wear hijab, but don't be too outgoing, because if you're too active, then a guy doesn't want to get married to you. But marriage is not the point of life, but it is the point of life, because you're not married yet, so, oh my God, you're 23 and you're not married, what the heck's wrong with you? Okay, so now, we deal with all of those types of things. I know I said that all in one breath, is that why you're laughing? What I'm hoping, inshallah, that we are going to take before we open it up for discussion is just that I need to understand that my self-worth is just like Sheikh Muslema mentioned, in relationship to my Creator. That's it. It starts here. At the end of the day, it's going to end here. When we are buried under the ground, no titles, nothing else is going with us. It's just a relationship with God. So now, if I have that relationship and it's strong, what am I going to do to help myself increase in that relationship, not just so that I can increase in that relationship with my Creator, but so I can benefit the people around me? And what do I need to understand about what He has revealed so I can understand my worth as a female, especially the high status that Islam has given women, my worth as a female, and how I can change the world through understanding that worth. So we need to understand who we are, before we're looking to outside sources, we need to educate ourselves so that when we're faced with things that we're confused about, we are able to critically say like, look, I've studied too. This is what I've learned. I don't necessarily agree with you. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from because what you just said really threw me off. And I feel like I've just been like spiritually abused, like Sheikh Muslema said. And as women, we deal with it all the time. Walk into a masjid, the women's hall is small, it smells, there's like food all over the place. Unfortunately, some women have not taken care of their kids and they haven't allowed their like husbands to take the kids or something. Like they're like kids like running all around and they're like sitting in the middle and they're eating. Have you guys done that kind of stuff? What the heck is that? This is a masjid. And please, don't even say that you haven't had a deep conversation with someone because you're on your period and everyone else is praying and you don't have to. So you're like over there and you're like, blah, 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 Allahu Akbar, blah, blah, and no one can concentrate because y'all are talking or I'm talking. That's part of the problem. These small things make a difference. What I do as an individual is going to impact my community. So we can't continue to blame what's going on all over the world, all over our masajid unless we're going to be part of the solution. So how can I be part of the solution as an individual, and how can I help make that solution a societal change? Those are 3 things to think about. One of them was my relationship with God, analyzing that. Second one, educating myself. Third one, I have to be a part of the solution, even if it's something small, like respecting when someone's praying and I don't have to. Sorry, I get really mad about that one. That's why I mentioned it. So please forgive me if I've offended anyone. I'm really sorry if I didn't mean to be offensive. But like, it's so frustrating. Like, you can't even hear them praying because like all you're hearing is like somebody talking about like how cute their boots are. You know what I'm saying? Have you guys dealt with that before? Is it just me? Sorry, that frustrates me. Anyway, so now inshallah, what we're gonna do, unless you have something to add, we're gonna inshallah open it up to Q&A or to discussion. So, okay, what we're gonna ask you to do is just come up here so you can grab the mic. What? Oh, the 3 things. One of them is analyze my relationship with God and what I can do to increase that. Number 2 is study so that I'm informed and I can be critically aware. And number 3 is understand that I am a part of the solution as an individual, and every one of my actions needs to be towards a solution, even if it's on an individual basis. Okay, yeah. Do you have a question, like a discussion question? Can you see if you can scream? Wait, can you hear her? Yeah. Really? Okay, come, fast, run. We can't. Can everyone hear her? No. Okay. This is great. That's your problem with all. You can't. Okay, look. So her issue, she's saying like, look. And first of all, just to clarify, I didn't say hadith say you can't be a lawyer or a doctor. I'm saying we hear things, or we're like, can we be a lawyer or a doctor? I'm sorry if those things were confused. There's nothing, and there's no hadith that says women can't be lawyers. But I understand. So your question is, where do I go to learn the actual answer when I can't find it online? First of all, online is not where we should be looking. We really need to study with the actual person because like, you're gonna find crazy stuff online. Second thing is check the Muslim answer.
When you have these types of questions, sometimes you do actually, I was going to say something, like you can do an initial internet search and you might find stuff and you may not. But I agree with what Maryam was saying is you should go to reputable scholars and shuyukh and bring the question to them. And usually they can direct you to sources that you can find the evidences for a different opinion. A lot of times, before I went to Egypt to study, I would like have one question and I would ask 6 different shuyukh because I would think that they're going to give me different answers. And at that time, I didn't know of any female scholars or women who studied to go to, so it was always male scholars or shuyukh or imams that I would end up going to. And then I would get a variation of answers. So I'll give you an example. At the MSA West conference that she's talking about, where I was very loud. There was someone who was concerned because they thought like my voice was out and I shouldn't have been speaking. in front of a male audience, and I shouldn't have raised my voice, like, somehow that was considered like immodest or whatnot. And as someone who hadn't studied, I was very conflicted about that. Very, very conflicted about that. So I went and checked with different scholars, and it was interesting because there are some that, actually at that time, subhanAllah, now that I come to think of it, one person that I asked, he was someone who hasn't studied formally. So he's only studied from books. He holds an imam position in a major masjid, but he had no formal training through an Islamic institution up until that point. So his answer was more conciliatory. It wasn't fiqh-based, it wasn't law-based. His answer was something like, this is something that you have to come to understand about the community, and it wasn't in any way solving my problem. So it was just, you have to understand this and sort of try to basically behave according to what people's comfort levels are, which again didn't do anything for me. So the second person that I went to was someone who had actually studied, was a scholar, was like a triple PhD from Egypt. And I asked him about that, and he was very, very quickly gave me assurance and was telling me that no, there's nothing in the religion that would prevent you from doing this. And then he proceeded to give me examples of when women did not only speak up but scream in the presence of men in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So how does he have this very specialized knowledge? Is because he is a scholar. And now that I've been able to access the Arabic language and understand the different sources, I can tell you that these are authentic books. There's a lot, and I want to say that we only have in the English dictionary or the English library, in the English library we probably have less than 1% of the wealth of Islamic knowledge that you can get in Arabic. Less than 1%. If you go into Egypt, if you go and study there, there's an entire genre of books called tabaqat, Islamic biographical dictionaries. And it's like the very first compendiums of history that was ever collected. And only like 2 generations after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, one of those biographical dictionaries still lasts to this day. And it talks about the biographies of female companions. Like there's, I think, one book dedicated to Khadija, I think, just the stories of Khadija. That's not in English. I would have never known those stories. I would have never known that these are authentic compilations to defend myself. But I referred to a scholar at that time. And alhamdulillah, that's what gave me assurance. The importance to ask people who know is popular figures may not be literate in fiqh. Okay, not everyone has studied Sharia. Not everyone knows the different sources and the differences of opinions, depending on even where they studied. Different parts of the world, if you go and study, let's say for example, in certain schools in India, they'll only teach you one madhab. So they'll come back and they'll say things like the majority of the scholars. But they're referring to the majority of, not even all of the Hanafi scholars, but the majority of the South Asian Hanafi scholars. But the term that's used in their books is majority of the scholars. So it's important to understand where you're taking your information from. If the person has they know tajweed and they've memorized the Quran and they know the seerah, that doesn't make them a scholar. If the person shares a lot of really cool stories and makes everyone pumped up, that doesn't make them a scholar. Legal studies is like, we joke and say, Al-Azhar is like going to law school. It's very technical stuff that you have to sit there and memorize. So make sure that you get wherever you're going to get your information, make sure to get it from someone who has the credentials in their background. And it's not considered rude in Islam to ask someone, where have you studied? And what have you studied? It's not even considered rude to say, who were your teachers? These are your right as a questioner of someone who's putting themselves as a religious authority to question them on where they're taking their knowledge from. So I don't know if this fully answered your question. The advice was to go to scholars. Now there's a lot more females who have studied. I'm not the only one, alhamdulillah, there's plenty more. Maryam also, mashallah, has started her journey in studying. So Second,
Hold
okay.
on 1 second. I have to ask you this first.
Sorry, go ahead.
Can y'all hear me or? Yeah, so, Assalamualaikum. I guess my question is, when I go to a bookstore or comic book stores or like a lot of conventions, a lot of times the speakers were talking about, how to be a perfect Muslima, or the books that are about how to be a perfect Muslima, are written by men and they're written by male scholars. And there's a lot of like information out there, like we talked about earlier, that's actually very, very disempowering for women. How do we separate what information we really should be listening to and what information we should be listening to? And how do we kind of figure out this like internal battle within us? How like men telling us again how we should live in our life, but other than that, like have like a growing up female scholars.
This is a good question. I mean, it's kind of like the theme, I guess, tonight. A couple things is that I wouldn't necessarily say it's wrong to take knowledge from male scholars. I took most of my knowledge from male scholars, actually, in Egypt. There's female scholars as well that I took from. But the important thing, as you mentioned, is like how do you be able to sort of sift through what you're receiving, whoever it's from, female or male, because actually some of the female teachers in Egypt were saying some of the craziest anti-women stuff I had ever heard. So it wasn't just, it's only coming from men. I would say that if you have basic Islamic literacy, and we talk about this term but we don't really define it, but basic Islamic literacy, what it allows you to do is be able to differentiate between something that is sacred, something that is absolute, versus something that is changeable, and something that is like the legal system of Islam would say that because of time, place, and culture, this ruling is amendable by this, depending on the circumstance. So I'll give you guys an example. There are minimum conditions for hijab, right? Everyone's aware of. But to say that one form of clothing, cultural clothing, is more pious than another is a cultural understanding, okay? If the conditions of hijab are met, whether the clothing is from India or from America or from anywhere, it doesn't make that one clothing from the Eastern world more pious or closer to Allah than something that covers in the same way from another country and is culturally relevant for that place. But you will still hear people say things like, jilbab is fard, right? You'll hear people say that. If that doesn't make sense, to you, when you first hear it and you ask for an explanation, that's where you have to go into investigation, whether you hear it from a male or a female. And this is where it's important also for every place. SubhanAllah, we have, the scholars would teach us, and it's through Islamic history that they would say that the scholar that you listen to is the one that understands your cultural context. So Imam al-Qarafi, when he's a famous scholar, Maliki scholar, he would say that if someone comes to you from a fatwa, from a land that you're not familiar with, answer him according to the land that he's coming from, not according to the land that you're living in. So this is really important, because a lot of times when you're hearing stuff that feels uncomfortable, it's not coming from someone who understands, who has both scholarship and understands your cultural context. Sometimes people may live in a particular culture, but that doesn't necessarily mean they understand the cultural context. And I think both of those are really important. So in terms of like source-wise, choose people who are culturally relevant and knowledgeable, as well as they have the authentic, authentic studies, yes. Okay. This is a very good question, mashallah. There is one main thing that makes me doubt a little the status of women in Islam, the ayah that makes it okay to hit women. How should I understand this ayah? Okay, so you're in luck, whoever's answering this question. I did a little bit of research on this, and actually for those who are in California, in Irvine there's going to be a women's conference that's only about this particular verse. And the tafsir, the commentaries from the Quran that are dealing with this verse. So I'm just going to share something quickly. There's a clause in the Quran, in one of the verses that says, وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ, and for the men, there is above them, عَلَيْهِنَّ meaning above women, a daraja, a level. Okay? This is an actual clause within a verse in the Quran. So I did comparative research where I looked at 20 different tafasir, 20 different commentaries, the most popular commentaries of their centuries, of their time. So the most well-known ones, Ibn Kathir, for example, Imam al-Alusi, and others. So I took 20 from the earliest period all the way to the modern day. And I compared what the mufassirin, the commentaries, were saying about this particular clause. And what I found was that there was a whole range of ways that people commented on this according to the context that they were coming from. But the best thing that was ever said about this clause was by a companion of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, related in the tafsir of Imam al-Tabari. And he said about that clause that he takes the daraja basically to mean a level of responsibility in terms of responsibility for his family. And so when he hears that Allah has given him this, it makes him want to be even better to the women folk of his family. This verse inspires him to be better to his wife and better to his children. That's the best thing that anyone has said all through Islamic history. And there are certain trends that I found. There were periods in Islamic history where what was said was very, very bad. Was bad. And this is, I can't blame Islam for this. I have to understand that this is a reflection of the time that particular commentator was living in. And again, you have to understand the sciences of the Quran to understand that what is considered actual tafsir versus what is considered opinion. So one commentator, for example, said, I'm going to say some funny things. One commentator said, men are better in this life and the hereafter. Another commentator said, if you look in the animal kingdom, the male animals are more beautiful and more strong and more intelligent than the female animals. One commentary said, what was it? It was actually something very disturbing. I can't really repeat all of it, but it seemed to imply that it was okay that marital rape was something that was okay. It was very disturbing. There were other commentaries that were the exact opposite. Okay? There were other commentaries, like Imam al-Razi, for example. I say that he's kind of like someone who was living in a cultural context where he did, in his mind, think that men were superior, but he was wanting to be as merciful with this concept as he could. So he says, the powerful should never abuse the weak, and instead, like it's, when a society, elevates its weak people, that's what proves the strength of that society. So he's being a little bit patronizing, but at least, what you get a sense from is he can't escape the cultural understanding that he's living in. Again, the best understanding for this verse came from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And a lot of times, if you look at the stories of the way that women were in that society, in his society, the women that he raised, and I say he raised because he cultivated and developed a generation of great women. When you learn about that, and then you even compare it to modern day America, forget the Muslim community, the non-Muslim community, you find a completely different example, and also one that is way more empowering. And amazing in its nature. I just wanted to mention one thing about the trends though. What I noticed is that basically at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the commentaries were good. Then it goes down, it stoops down really low. The lowest point actually was 1800s time, post-industrialization. And some of that stuff, I want to say in the modern era, you found a rise of two things, really bad commentaries and really amazing commentaries. So we have actually both. In our times today, we have access, the more modern commentaries that are people have made. Sheikh Tantawi, that passed away from Azhar, his commentary is actually very good. He quotes Ibn Abbas when he's talking about this verse. So in the modern times, we actually see a rise of going back to the prophetic tradition and understanding women, but at the same time, there is a rise of some people who are actually bringing it lower than it's ever been throughout the centuries. So realize that both are out there. In terms of the verse about, about hitting women, it is a long answer because I want to go through commentaries and I don't have the time here. But inshallah, if you're interested in getting information, talk to me afterwards because I don't want you to leave with a wrong understanding of this. Okay. So one of the best things that I've seen about this particular verse is something that Sheikh Abdullah Adhami did a class on the internet. So I want to refer you to that because he really explains it thoroughly. I don't know how you would search it. I mean, you can look up his name in YouTube, I guess, Abdullah Adhami, and see his discussion, because he did research on not just the verse, but what was actually being done at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's time, and how people interpreted and misinterpreted later on. So please go and check this out on YouTube if you can. So
I just wanted to add something really quickly to what she was saying. 2 points. One of them is that with regards to, she just mentioned a number of different tafsirs, which are commentaries of the Quran, saying kind of some whack stuff, right? So it's important to understand that a person's view of religion is going to be impacted by the surrounding that they're in. So for example, if I was born and raised in a community where women never left their house and there was no masjid for women and there was no way that I could even go to Eid prayer, right? In that type of community, the imams who are saying things in that community are going to be saying things that are maybe religiously rooted, but they're using a cultural understanding to interpret that. Does that make sense?
So I was just saying, even not just necessarily cultural, but contextual, which means that, for example, I give this, certain parts of Pakistan, my relatives are from Afghanistan, they'll go and visit. In America, they don't wear hijab, actually, and they consider themselves safe. But when they go to these regions, basically, they're kind of in the slums or whatever, when they go and visit, if they're not covered, they literally cover for protection only, as in, they will be raped, they will be physically harassed, they will be touched, even with hijab and with niqab. There are people in the street who will grab them. So, I mean, if someone in that context is telling their women it's required for you to wear a niqab, it's not because he thinks niqab in its asl is required. It's because safety, ensuring the safety of the women of society is required. So contextual is also something important. It could be the specific context that something is mentioned in.
So the only reason I wanted to mention this, and I really appreciate that clarification, is that I don't want any of us to leave this session going man, there were some really whack people in our in their understanding. What's important for us to understand are that rules and regulations, there are certain things that are going to stay the same always. 5 times a day pray, it's going to be the same. But unless you're traveling, for example, or we know there's specific situations. But there are certain things that are going to be impacted by the interpretation of the people in that time. And there's a part in our religion for culture and the way that culture impacts our understanding of our religion. So what works for us here is not always going to work for us in Saudi Arabia or in Iran or in India or in Japan. Different places are going to be different. But if they don't go against the actual rulings of Islam, then that's okay. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is please don't leave here feeling what just happened. Make sure we do our personal research, inshallah, and understand that colonialism, industrialism, all these things impacted the way that scholars even saw women. So the way that the group that ruled the earth, okay, in terms of the power structure, if they're the ones who have a certain view of women, and even if that's worse than what Islam started with, then people who are impacted by that are going to start interpreting verses based on that as well. So it's just important to keep that in mind. It's not necessarily religiously based. A lot of times this has to do with so many other things that play into it, and that's why we just need to study. We don't need to do this studying if we're just trying to live our lives happily. We're talking about if you want to get in terms of scholarship, then we need to do some serious research. Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
So there's a question that is one of the sisters. I'm a sister in the back.
I don't need a mic. I have a loud voice. Can I ask a question? You have to ask.
Assalamu alaikum. Sister, first of all, thank you both for doing this. It means a lot, to all of us, but, I know myself, it means a lot to see people like you. Gives me hope for the future. So thank you. I wanted to ask, you said that only 1% of this information is actually in English. everything, but enough of it has to be made available. Who, if anyone, is making an effort to translate these works into English or even other languages to make it available to people like us? Inshallah, one of my goals is to learn to read Arabic, but I'm not going to reach that level where I'm going to be, even if I learn to read it, to really understand the knowledge of the scene at a deep level. I will still need it in translation. So is anyone making an effort to translate these works, these gems of knowledge, that you, mashallah, you've been so blessed to have access to, that's such a big blessing. I really envy you, I really envy you. But who is making that effort to make these things available to us, people like us? Because people like us are like those people, I felt so much for these people who are deaf. We are like that. We are no different. This knowledge should be available to us, but what can we do? I don't know.
For your comment and your question. It's very moving, and I want to say I feel very, very guilty hearing that, because definitely for the responsibility for those who did get the chance to study is to now work to make this stuff available for everyone. Alhamdulillah, there have been some efforts. There's someone named Dr. Akram Nadwi, and he has a 57-volume compendium on the female hadith scholars. And I heard that it actually got more. It's more in the range of 63. The initial thing that they put out in the media was 57, but I've heard from people who are close to him that it's more like 63 volumes, and that's in English. The introduction of that book is available on Amazon. It's called Muhaddithat, and the rest is going to be published. Alhamdulillah, they finally found a publisher who's willing to publish it all, but it will be published in the coming years. In terms of other efforts, I wanted to mention sohibweb.com. It doesn't necessarily have major translations of these works, but it does have, I would say, in English, important material that the Western audience should hear. And that includes, for example, the issue of celebrating holidays that's misunderstood, or some of the controversial things, following a madhab. There's something I translated from Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi about the idea of whether or not you have to follow a madhab, or you need to, or you take, you don't follow any madhab versus, just taking scholarly opinions from here and there. There's other efforts. I wanted to mention the author, Dr. Jamal Badawi, in English. He has some books about women. He has a book called Gender Equity in Islam. It's very powerful, mashallah. It's a short little book, but I think you can even find the entire thing online if you search for it. He has another book called Women in Islam. In the English library, there are translations from the works of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and I know that those are being translated as well. There are 2 books that I'm hoping to see translated soon. I had thought one of them was translated, so I didn't attempt to do it. The second one, I took permission from the author. One of them is called Tahrir al-Mar'a fi Asr Risala, which is the liberation of women during the age of the message. And basically, it's a book that is entirely full of narrations from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which basically show that the Muslim community in the modern era has misconceptions about women. And if you just read these narrations, you would realize how different that era was compared to what we think today. This book, inshallah, we hope to see translated soon. The second one is something by Muhammad Amara, and it talks about 4 misunderstood hadith. A lot of things are underway, but they're not necessarily fully translated out yet. The important things, I guess. If anyone else in the audience has resources that they know of that have been a benefit to them in English when it comes to the role of women, I encourage you to speak to the sister afterwards. And I don't know, I was told that we didn't have very much time, that we were supposed to close the session because there are people who need to come in. messages.
Sister Barakallahu Fiki, thank you so much for bringing this up. I know the pain that you've experienced because I've gone through the same thing, and I know that many of us go through that where we feel so unable to connect because we just don't know where to go. I'm not Arab and I didn't understand Arabic, so I want to just quickly share something that I would recommend for you and for all of us who are in this situation, which is one, make a consistent relationship with the Quran. Inshallah, all of us already have that, but let me just tell you quickly, my experience is that I would read it every single day in English and I would struggle to read it in Arabic. This took me like 7 years until I finally started being able to understand the general message of the Quran without needing a translation. Because I was listening to it so much, I was reading it so much in English, so that I couldn't speak Arabic, but if I was listening to the Quran, I could understand it. Now, not necessarily all the deep meanings, but I could understand the general message. Okay, so then after that, alhamdulillah, I was blessed to go to Egypt so I could study Arabic, but that was just the opening of it. It's taken me years to be able to still read a book and understand it. So what I wanted to say is that through that time period, I also had teachers like Imam Suhaib Webb or people in the community who can guide us through our questions. So it's really important that we study with someone. If we can't find someone to study with, I'm sure there have been people who tried to study but can't find someone to study with. Look, for example, on suhaibweb.com, we have an email that you can contact, and we can see if we can try to hook you up with someone maybe in your locality, or ask people who you know. But the point is that I am making a consistent effort to study with someone in person. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Arabic, but the point is that I have a source of knowledge that I'm studying with on a weekly basis. I can ask my fiqh questions to, I can ask my life questions to. Don't ask counseling questions to a person of knowledge unless they're a counselor, all right? A sheikh is not the person you go to when you have marital issues. Don't ask those types of questions, but ask like Islamic questions, right? So we can do regular studies with them, and then at the same time, read books like Al-Muhaddithat, like she mentioned, incredible book in English, super easy to understand. You will read that book and just be like, wow, Islam empowers women. Where is this? That is the stuff that needs to be translated. But alhamdulillah, there's the beginning of some work. So number one, maintain a consistent relationship with the Quran. It will transform our understanding of ourselves. Number two, study with someone on a regular basis, even if it's in English or whatever other language. Make sure it's someone who understands American culture, because as much as we can read like fatwas online and all that like stuff, when they're from other countries, they send some whack stuff, and it's because that's what works for them. That's not going to work for us. So we need to be really aware of what our culture is as well. Wallahu a'lam. I personally struggle with fashion and hijab, and at times I prioritize fashion over modesty. What advice would give to help? Example, at times I feel like I like to show non-Muslims that Muslims can be fashionable. Is that okay? Oh, you're so cute. Okay, so personally, I didn't really like wearing hijab. This is such a long story, but the point is, I was all about fashion too. And I struggled with this because I was like, how can it be like Britney Spears when I wear hijab, right? So it was a personal struggle. The thing that helped me the most was connecting with the Quran. As soon as I started connecting with the Quran, not that day, but over time, I started changing. It started changing the way I viewed my self-worth. It started changing the way I viewed the perspectives of other people that looked at me. It started changing the way that I cared about my fashion and my dress. Because I no longer cared about what people thought or trying to be attractive. It was, is this going to be attractive to Allah? Is this going to be pleasing to Allah? And that was through the Quran. So I would recommend this is something we all struggle with. Our society is like, well, not everyone, but many of us struggle with. Our society is like, look beautiful, look like this, wear this, right? So we struggle, but when we have such a close connection with God, that's above all the other struggles we go through, and so it's easy to maintain what He's asking us to do. Now, is it wrong to be fashionable? No, please be fashionable. Please don't look so bad because you wear hijab. Look, alhamdulillah, there's such an opportunity for us to make dawah through the way that we dress. The only thing is, just do it within the requirements. That's it. You can wear whatever colors you want or all that stuff, but do it within the requirements of hijab. Look nice while you do it, inshallah. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, I think we have to close because people are coming in to set up. So, jazakumullah khair for coming, and inshallah, please make dua for all of us and forgive us for our shortcomings. Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Muslema and Sister Maryam. Just really quickly, everyone, Maghrib prayer is being held